Picture this. It's March 2027. You're standing there in front of your bathroom mirror, ripping open the envelope with your annual physical results. You look at your weight, that number you've been battling with for 20 years. It's stable, exactly the same as last year. You haven't gained a single pound. But here is what that scale isn't telling you. Under the surface, your body composition has shifted. You are now carrying 15% more visceral fat, the dangerous kind that wraps around your organs, than you were just 2 years ago. And the crazy part? You didn't skip a workout. You didn't binge on cheat meals. You've been poisoned. Now don't panic. I don't mean poisoned by a virus or some bacteria. I mean you've been poisoned by your own food supply through a mechanism so subtle and so biochemically precise that most people go their entire lives without ever realizing it's happening. We call this metabolic capture. And look, I know how that sounds. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. It is simply a business model. In fact, it is the exact same playbook the tobacco industry used in the 1960s to keep the cash flowing even as the evidence on cancer was piling up. This same playbook is running right now in real time as the U.S. stares down a barrel of $4.5 trillion in annual healthcare costs, with chronic disease crushing 60% of the adult population every single day. This isn't speculation. This is just pattern recognition. And I promise you, once you see this pattern, you can never unsee it. Here is the biological reality that the big corporations really don't want you to understand. When a food system's entire profit model becomes mathematically dependent on hyper-palatability, making food so addictive you can't stop eating it, and when shareholder returns threaten to swallow the entire ethical framework of the company, the executives in the boardroom are left with only 3 options. Option 1. Prioritize public health. They could reform their recipes, but that would trigger a massive collapse in revenue. It would be suicide in the stock market, and basically, industry Armageddon. So that's out. Option 2. Impose severe personal responsibility. They could cut sugar, seed oils, and additives by 30, 40, or 50%. But that triggers a consumption depression. People buy less. Again, shareholder suicide and economic catastrophe. So they go with option 3, the hidden option. The one they've used before. The one they are deploying right now while you are distracted by headlines about Ozempic and gym memberships. Metabolic capture. The playbook is deceptively simple. They don't default on the calories, they default on the nutrient density. They keep the shelves stocked, the meals on schedule, but they engineer the food so that caloric density is running at 100%, while forcing your body to accept a nutrient absorption rate of only 10%. Think about that gap. That negative 90% gap? That is a transfer of vitality. It's a direct transfer from you, the consumer, the patient, the parent, straight to the conglomerate. It is effectively a tax on your mitochondria. And the best part for them? It requires no FDA ban, no warning label, and no admission of guilt. It operates purely through the mechanical interaction of dopamine spikes, insulin resistance, and cellular inflammation. And make no mistake, it is already underway. Let me walk you through the history, because in this game, this time is never different. Let's rewind to 1980. The U.S. obesity rate was sitting at roughly 15%. For a decade, the nation's agricultural capacity had been redirected toward corn and soy monocultures. We bought cheap calories on credit, and the bill had finally come due. The conventional wisdom at the time said the U.S. had two choices: stop subsidizing processed grains and let food prices rise, or explicitly ignore the science and destroy the public health baseline forever. They chose option 3. In January 1980, the USDA released the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. This document would define American metabolic policy for the next 40 years. They agreed to peg fat consumption at minimal levels, levels far below what humans had evolved to eat. Carbohydrates were crowned as the base of the food pyramid. Period. No negotiation. The mechanism was brutally effective. If the public tried to eat real food to feel full, the industry just flooded the zone with low-fat engineered products to defend that baseline. The supermarket effectively became the industry's distribution arm. Public health was completely subordinated to agricultural surplus needs. And this wasn't just a temporary blip. That pyramid stayed in place until 2005. Plenty of time for the magic to work. Here is where the health transfer begins. Between 1980 and 2000, type 2 diabetes rates tripled. The next decade, they doubled again. From 1980 to today, adult obesity has been on a relentless upward trajectory. But remember, the official guidance was eat less fat. Citizens were locked into low-fat compliance, while sugar intake skyrocketed to 150 pounds a year. They were experiencing negative metabolic returns every single year for a decade.
If you were a good citizen and followed the food pyramid created in 1992, you ate every recommended serving of grain. You avoided every gram of saturated fat. And when you went to check your blood work in 2002, your insulin sensitivity had been gutted by 30 to 40% in real terms. The industry provided every calorie. Technically, you weren't starving, but your vitality, your cellular energy, had been silently confiscated through insulin resistance. By 2010, the cost of treating metabolic disease exploded from 5% of GDP to 17%. A massive increase in just 30 years. Now, that sounds profitable for the healthcare system, right? Managing disease through pharmaceutical discipline? Wrong. The University of North Carolina did the autopsy on this era. They found that the absolute level of metabolic health barely exists anymore. Only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. The healthcare GDP grew not because the system was curing disease, but because the disease was growing faster than the cure. And here is the kicker. Ultra-processed foods accounted for nearly 60% of our entire caloric intake during this period. Translation? The industry fed its way out of a profit slump. And who paid the bill? Consumers. Ordinary Americans buying diet sodas and heart-healthy cereals. Parents, retirees. They paid with chronic inflammation that was systematically imposed on them for decades. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate product architecture. Now, let me show you the exact same pattern unfolding right now in real time. Same four-stage cycle, same mechanisms, same inevitable outcome. As of 2024, U.S. healthcare spending is at $4.5 trillion. The chronic disease burden is at 60% and climbing. The Milken Institute projects chronic disease costs will hit $6 trillion by 2030. That is higher than the entire GDP of Japan. Insulin costs alone now exceed billions annually. It's a tax on survival every single day. The CDC's projection?
Without major policy changes, obesity rises to 50% within a decade. The metabolic cost will exceed the historical damage record of tobacco. This isn't a temporary spike, folks. This is structural. The biology is officially unsolvable through conventional dieting. Pattern confirmed. Look at the money. The pharmaceutical market cap in 2000 was substantial. By 2025, with the arrival of GLP-1 agonists, drugs like Ozempic, it is astronomical. They don't call it addiction management anymore. The new euphemism is lifelong maintenance therapy. The mechanics are identical to the food industry. They sell massive quantities of symptom suppression drugs, suppressing the biological signals that would naturally prevail if the body were just allowed to heal in a toxin-free environment. When the obesity crisis hit a breaking point in 2023, did we fix the food? No. The FDA approved weight loss drugs for children as young as 12. This wasn't medical caution. This was a policy intervention designed to put a lid on the visibility of the crisis. The American Academy of Pediatrics has been even more explicit. They issued guidelines suggesting surgery and medication for childhood obesity, explicitly committing to medicalize the problem rather than address the food environment. Think about that for a second. A treatment plan that costs twice as much as real food. Yet the root cause remains suppressed through medical intervention. Same playbook, different terminology. Here is where it gets personal. Between 2019 and 2023, the price of fresh produce rose by over 20%. During that same period, the relative cost of ultra-processed grain and sugar commodities remained artificially low due to subsidies. That is a negative nutritional yield. Tufts University quantified this damage.
American households relying on the standard American diet lost years of healthy life expectancy during that single period. Years of life, trillions in productivity, transferred from citizens to the healthcare industrial complex. You didn't get a bill in the mail for metabolic theft. No insurance notice arrived. But make no mistake, your longevity was confiscated just the same through the mechanism of mitochondrial dysfunction. The system fed you at $2 a meal, while the damage cost $200 in future care. They are effectively liquidating your health with calories that are worth less each year. This is metabolic capture in operation. Not theory. Verified, measurable, undeniable. But here is what makes the contemporary version of metabolic capture even more insidious than the 1980s version. The regulatory architecture has been redesigned to trap your biology inside the system. Hospital formularies and insurance codes now apply preferential treatment to pharmaceutical interventions. If a doctor prescribes a statin, they face zero risk regarding standard of care protocols. But if a doctor prescribes a ketogenic diet or a fasting regimen, they face higher liability risks. The clinic has to justify why they are departing from guidelines. The result? Doctors are systematically incentivized to prescribe pills instead of food. Your health is being channeled toward pharmaceutical financing, whether you consent to it or not. School lunch programs face the same trap. Regulations require them to serve specific quantities of grains and milk to get federal funding. When budgets are tight, schools have to choose between serving cheap processed carbs or losing their funding. They're trapped. This is what experts like Casey Means and Robert Lustig call captured biology.
Regulatory requirements force institutions to prioritize industrial food products regardless of the metabolic risk. Your doctor, your school, your insurance company, they are all locked into a system designed to accommodate agricultural surplus needs at your expense. Pattern complete. All 4 stages are operational. Now, I know what you're thinking. I hear it all the time. But wait, this time is different. The science is independent now. They wouldn't subordinate public health to corporate needs. Let me address this directly. The FDA Modernization Act supposedly established regulatory independence. The commissioners say, the FDA is not and must never become the industry's marketing arm. Beautiful rhetoric, really. Now, let's look at the reality. When the data on sugar and heart disease emerged, did the system say, we need to follow the science? No. They buried the data for 50 years. When microbiome research exploded in 2020, did the USDA overhaul the guidelines? No. They doubled down on processed replacements. Former FDA officials have acknowledged that the preconditions for corporate dominance are strengthening. Industry user fees fund 45% of the FDA budget. When the industry pays half your salary, you cannot maintain independence. The fiscal pressure is irresistible. Next objection. Consumers are sophisticated now. We demand gluten-free and organic. Partially true, which is exactly why metabolic capture in the 2020s operates differently. Today, the mechanism is health washing. You can't escape toxic ingredients by moving to plant-based alternatives because the processing requires the same seed oils and binders. You can't flee to natural labels because the legal definition allows for 50+ synthetic additives. Where exactly do you flee when 73% of the grocery store is ultra-processed? The trap is ubiquitous. Final objection. Obesity is under control. We have Ozempic.
The crisis is over. Look at the projections. We are still climbing to 50% obesity. They aren't unwinding the capture. They are monetizing the damage. And even with the drugs, look at the body composition data. Patients are losing weight, sure, but they are losing lean muscle mass at rapid rates. It generates a skinny fat frailty. You are still experiencing metabolic degradation. It's just less visible than the 300-pound version. Going from an expanding waistline to withering muscle mass doesn't mean the damage stopped. This time is never different. The pattern is absolute. So, the big question, what do you do? How do you protect yourself when the system is engineering negative metabolic returns on your diet? Here is a 5-point action framework. This isn't health nut speculation. This is strategic allocation based on how metabolic capture actually operates. 1. Eliminate exposure to ultra-processed commodities. If you are eating products with ingredients you cannot find in a home kitchen, you are the target. You are the biology that is being harvested. That box of cereal will provide every promised calorie, and those calories will generate progressively less energy. Cut them out. 2. Shift to metabolically protected inputs. I'm talking single-ingredient foods: steak, eggs, avocados, broccoli. These foods explicitly compensate for the environment through nutrient density. If the toxic load runs high, your liver function is preserved by real nutrients. Real food doesn't protect against the cost of inflation, but it eliminates the biological erosion. Whole foods are the asset class explicitly designed to neutralize the inflammation mechanism. 3. Acquire real health with pricing power.
That means muscle mass. Skeletal muscle is the organ of longevity. It acts as a glucose sink, absorbing sugar from the blood without needing insulin. You need to provide metabolic protection by growing lean tissue. Strength-focused strategies where you increase the load annually offer real resilience that adjusts for aging. 4. The contrarian play, intermittent fasting. Here is the inversion nobody talks about. The system relies on frequency of consumption just as much as quality. If you eat 6 times a day, spiking insulin constantly, you are feeding the profit model. Use the opposite mechanism. Lock in periods of zero consumption. Let the body burn its own fat. Use autophagy to clean out cellular debris. Obviously, be careful if you have a history of eating disorders, but the principle is sound. In a metabolic capture environment, the abstainer wins and the consumer loses. 5. Jurisdictional and sourcing diversification. Buy food from farmers who maintain soil discipline. Buy meat from local farms where regenerative practices are secure and chemical inputs are minimal. This isn't about being a snob. It's about preserving optionality when supply chain degradation accelerates beyond what the supermarket can hide. The window for this lifestyle shift is closing. Not tomorrow, not next month, but within the next few years as soil depletion worsens and food quality crashes. Let me leave you with this biological certainty. The government won't admit that the CDC projects diabetes rates rising from 11% to over 20% within 2 decades. Dialysis costs are going to eat massive percentages of the budget. Mandatory spending for Medicare chronic care will consume larger and larger shares of the economy. There is no political pathway to health consolidation. Banning junk food is electoral suicide. Taxing sugar enough to close the gap is a political impossibility. And the health at every size movement, while well-intentioned, is biologically implausible when cellular function is failing. That leaves one option for them: metabolic capture. Medicate the symptoms away. Suppress the signals. Transfer wealth from patients to the system through lifelong subscriptions. The only question is intensity. Will they replicate the 1980s playbook with slow burn inflammation? Or will profit pressures force even more aggressive capture with direct pharmacological dependency? Either way, the transfer is coming. The mechanism is operational. Your liver, your pancreas, your children's future fertility. That is the collateral being liquidated to pay for a profit burden that cannot be serviced through conventional food sales. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is the autopsy of every industrial food system in history. The Romans poisoned themselves with lead pipes. The Victorians adulterated bread with alum. The United States ran the low-fat experiment from 1980 to 2020. The pattern is biological, predictable, and unavoidable. You have a choice. Remain on the standard American diet and watch your vitality erode by 20, 30, or 40% over the next decade. Or reallocate now. Move to whole foods, muscle-centric medicine, and regenerative sourcing. Position yourself on the winning side of the health transfer. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell because the next video is going to break down the 3 specific biomarkers that will tell you exactly when your metabolic function is about to crash. I'm talking about the insulin signals, the triglyceride ratios, and the liver enzymes that precede the diagnosis. The health transfer isn't coming, it's here. The only question is whether you're prepared. Drop a comment below. Are you reallocating away from processed food, or are you staying in the supermarket aisle? I read every single one. The pattern is absolute. This time is never different. The diagnosis is coming due, and you are the one holding it.